My husband Caleb had one rule that I never thought would become the reason our marriage would fall apart. Caleb: do not go to your parents' home without my permission. My name is Naomi, I'm 28 years old, and for almost 3 years I had convinced myself that Caleb was simply protective. At first, his rules seemed small. He wanted to know where I was going, who I was talking to, when I would be home. I thought it was because he loved me, but slowly the rules became something else. One Saturday morning, I received a message from my mother, Susan. She asked me to come over because she had something important to tell me. I immediately grabbed my purse. Then Caleb walked into the room. Where are you going? My mother's house. He stared at me. Did you ask me first? I stopped. Why would I need permission to visit my own parents? His expression changed. Because you're my wife, Naomi. And I told you not to go there without asking me. I tried to stay calm. It's my mother's house. She needs me. Caleb stepped closer. Then tell her you're not coming. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. For the first time, I realized this wasn't concern. It was control. I called Susan and told her I couldn't come. She sounded disappointed, but she didn't argue. That evening, my father, Michael, called. He asked why I hadn't visited in weeks. I didn't know what to say. I couldn't tell him that I was afraid of upsetting my husband. Then Caleb walked into the room. He looked at my phone. Who was that? My father. Why was he calling you? I stared at him. Because he's my father. Caleb. He became angry. I already told you don't go to their house unless I say it's okay. That night I barely slept. The next morning, Lily, my best friend, came to see me. She took one look at my face and knew something was wrong. Naomi, what is happening? I finally told her everything. Lily stayed silent for a moment. Then she said something that changed the way I looked at my marriage. Naomi, a husband can ask for respect. He cannot demand control over your entire life. Those words stayed with me. And that same evening, Susan called again. Her voice sounded frightened. She told me something had happened at home, something involving Caleb, and she begged me to come over. But when Caleb heard the conversation, he took my car keys from the table. Then he looked at me and said, "You are not going anywhere." I stared at Caleb, then at the keys in his hand. "Give them back." He shook his head. "You're staying here." I had never seen him behave like this before. I reached for my phone. He immediately asked who I was calling. My father. Caleb became silent. Then he placed the keys on the table. "Go if you want, but don't expect me to be here when you return." I grabbed my purse and left. For the first time in years, I drove to my parents' house without asking permission. When I arrived, Susan was waiting at the door. She hugged me tightly. Michael stood behind her. His face looked serious. I asked what had happened. Susan looked at Michael. Then she looked at me. "We found something in your husband's name." My heart sank. "What do you mean?" Michael handed me a folder. Inside were copies of bank statements. There were large transfers from our family account. Money had been disappearing for months and every transfer led to an account connected to Caleb. I couldn't believe it. Susan started crying. "We wanted to tell you earlier, but we were afraid you wouldn't believe us." I felt sick. All those times Caleb told me my parents were trying to interfere in our marriage. All those times he told me they didn't respect him. Maybe he had been trying to keep me away because he didn't want me to discover the truth? Then Lily arrived. She had followed me after I told her where I was going. She looked at the documents and immediately said, "Naomi, you need to protect yourself before you confront him." I nodded. For the first time, I wasn't thinking like a frightened wife. I was thinking like someone who had finally opened her eyes. That night, I returned home. Caleb was waiting. "Where were you?" I looked at him calmly. "At my parents' house." His face changed. "I told you not to go." "I know." "Then why did you disobey me?" "Because I finally realized I don't need your permission to see my family." He stepped toward me. "Who told you those things?" I didn't answer. His eyes became nervous. "You talked to your father." I placed the folder on the table. Then I asked one question. "Why have you been taking money from my family?" Caleb froze. For several seconds he said nothing. Then he looked at me. "You don't understand. I want you to explain." He couldn't. I picked up my phone and quietly recorded everything. Then Caleb finally said something I never expected. He admitted that he had been trying to separate me from my parents because they knew too much. But before he could explain what he meant, someone knocked on the front door. It was Lily, and she wasn't alone. Caleb stared at the door. I opened it. Lily stood outside with Susan and Michael. Caleb immediately became defensive. "Why are all of you here?" Michael stepped forward. "Because our daughter deserves the truth." Caleb looked at me. "Naomi, please listen to me. I had already heard enough." For years, he had slowly isolated me from the people who loved me. He had made me believe that visiting my parents was somehow disrespectful to him, and while I was trying to keep our marriage peaceful, he had been taking money from my family. Susan handed me another document. This one showed that Caleb had tried to transfer ownership of a property that belonged to me. I looked at him. "Is this why you wanted me away from my parents?" He lowered his head. "I was afraid they would find out." Michael shook. His head came. "You didn't just lie to Naomi. You tried to control her." Caleb finally apologized, but this time his apology wasn't enough. I told him something I had been too afraid to say before. "I am done." He looked shocked. "Naomi, please don't leave." I gave him a calm look. "You spent 3 years deciding where I could go, who I could see, and what I was allowed to do. Now I'm making one decision. For myself, I'm leaving." Lily helped me pack my things. Susan waited outside. Michael loaded my bags into the car. For the first time, I wasn't walking away alone. I was walking toward freedom. A few weeks later, I filed for divorce. The evidence I had collected helped protect me from Caleb's financial claims. The money he had taken was returned, and the property remained mine. But the biggest victory wasn't the money house. It wasn't the house. It wasn't even the divorce. It was finally understanding that love should never require you to surrender your freedom. Months later, I visited my parents again. Susan opened the door with tears in her eyes. Michael hugged me. Lily was sitting at the kitchen table waiting for us. I looked around the room. For the first time in years, I felt completely safe. I had once believed obeying Caleb would keep my marriage together. Instead, it had slowly erased who I was. Walking away didn't destroy my life. It gave me my life back. And when Caleb finally understood what he had lost, it was already too late. Because Naomi was no longer the woman who needed permission to live her own life. She was finally the woman who knew her own worth.